Hello everyone. Thanks for joining the fifth episode of Mara and Friends webinar series. Today's topic is clarity, confidence, credibility, what it takes to stand out in private markets. Today I will be joining by Matthew Craig-Greene. He is a founder and principal of Wagtails Private Markets, a boutique consultancy that helps private market firms find clarity in their positioning, build conviction in their narrative, and create materials that land with LPs and other key stakeholders. So Matt works with GPs, advisors, and LPs across private equity, venture capital, and private credit. Hi, Matt, and thank you for joining this webinar.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And we are going to unpack what actually works today, what people get wrong, and where marketing is heading, especially in trust-driven industries like ours. So Matt is someone who spent years in thinking deeply about how brands earn trust and not just attention. And I have a really strong statement that I would like to start this webinar on, which is,
Okay.
yeah, I think actually that there is no such thing as bad marketing. What are your thoughts? Is every attention good? And is that the way to build a trust?
Okay, so there's quite a lot to unpack there. Quite a lot I disagree with, I suppose, to start with, but I think that's probably a better way to start a conversation with something that everyone agrees on. So that's good. Um, is there such a thing as bad marketing? Yeah, there definitely is. And you don't have to spend a lot of effort to find it. I think in private markets as much as anywhere else, and maybe more so. Um, so you said you're talking about there's no such thing as bad marketing, and you kind of related that to attention. Yeah, so I think in most cases, if your marketing gets you attention, you would say that it's been successful if that's the goal. But I think marketing has to do a lot more than that. It's not just about showing people that you exist. Having said that, that's a component of this. Of course, if people don't know that Wagtails or Mara exist, it's very difficult for them to think about working with us, right? So there's definitely a component of that that's important. Um, but particularly in markets, as you say, in industries where trust is such a big component, it's a very different space to somebody buying a can of Coke or a head of lettuce. There's trust issues there too, but we're talking about very significant amounts of money, a lot of personal reputation tied up in the decisions, the purchasing decisions we make, and the decisions we make around who we're going to partner with. So there has to be something more involved. You can't just wave a big flag and shout, "Look at me." Differentiation is not the end goal. It's a way to help you get an opportunity to communicate something meaningful. And for me, that's bad marketing. Bad marketing is interrupting someone's day, interrupting someone's workflow to show them something, and then them realizing that there's nothing to see. So I think, marketers, people that are running businesses, fund managers, just like anyone else, really need to think about what it is that they want people to understand about them and their firms, and their products, and not just can I get people to look at me? Because even that can be challenging in such a crowded industry, but it's definitely not the end goal. And anybody who starts out with that as their main objective, I think probably is perpetrating what I call bad marketing. But what are your thoughts? Where are you really coming from when you say that, Alexandra? Because it's quite a provocative statement, I think.
Yeah, so I was coming from the statement that marketing is a way to portray yourself, to be visible, to create that attention, to create that traffic, to so people can know who you are, what you do, and everything. So just like in the essence of driving attention, because that's the ultimate goal, to be seen. Whereas branding is maybe something else that is built on trust. And that's why I want to ask you now, since you work with a lot of private markets firms at every very different stages, When managers first come to you, what are the most common branding issues you see?
Okay, that's a good question. That's quite an easy one to start with. So thank you for starting gently, Alexandra. I appreciate that. I think by far the most common issue that I see is a fund manager that is has spotted somebody else that's been successful and then just tries to copy what they're doing. And you see this a lot in, the vernacular of and the cliched vernacular of private equity firms who talk about the fact that they're top quartile, that they've developed proprietary deal origination, that they are hands-on investors, that have a 100-day value creation plan. All of these things they've seen in a presentation that Permira has given at a super return or somewhere like that, and Permira's like a multi tens of billion-dollar, probably close to $100 billion in assets under management, and those storylines, those arcs, those shortcut messages that they might legitimately use, um, they're not a good way to stand out and explain why somebody should choose you rather than Permira. Because effectively, if you've got a choice and you can have Permira or somebody who's trying to be as close to Permira as possible, that's not a difficult decision. You just pick Permira. Like, why would you take the additional risk on the brand that's not as well established? And that's something that is difficult to get people to understand because it's so tempting, right? They think they have the answers. They've seen like seven, eight, 10 really successful private equity firms, VC firms, and they say, well, I want to be successful. And so therefore, the shortcut thinking is, well, I should just copy what they've done because those are the things that have made them successful. And of course, they're not, right? There's 117 things that Permira and BC Partners and KKR and Cinven and all these other groups are doing that has allowed them to succeed in the way that they have. Now, the job of the marketing team is to communicate how and why they've been successful, and importantly, why you should believe that they'll continue to be successful. And, you know, if you aren't those groups and you haven't done those things, then trying to present yourself as being like them, you're doomed to failure. And not just because it's not as easy as that, because you'll get a second question. Well, explain to me how this is the case. But also because you just go with the original, you go with the super brand if you've got the choice.
Yeah.
Um, so like that's how I see things. But what do you find? Because you're working with a lot of emerging managers, but also some like really established managers that are trying to look at more innovative ways of bringing capital into deals and funds. What do you see a similar thing with those groups, or are there different kinds of problems that you're seeing more frequently, would you say, Alexandra?
So I think I would agree with you. It's a very interesting perspective, and that's something we also see from the Mara side as well. Because managers often look at established firms and they try to mirror how they present themselves,
Yeah.
whether that's their messaging, materials, even tone, or even brand colors. So, but the challenge is that those firms, they have years of track record and reputation behind them. So what works for them doesn't necessarily translate, right? So for emerging managers, especially, I think that actually can dilute what makes them interesting.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ones that stand out are usually the ones who lean into what's genuinely differentiated about them. And even if it feels less polished at first, I would always say like portray your difference, why you're different than the others.
I think that's a good point. I think there's an expectation for investors if they're meeting a smaller manager, an emerging manager. The expectation is that they aren't going to be that polished in the way that they talk, or the way their presentations are, and the way they talk about what they do. You should, I think you're right here. You should allow a little bit of rawness, a little bit of vulnerability to show. It's a much more honest way to start a conversation and a relationship. And it's such a challenge to get people to understand that they can express themselves. Like, what
Yeah.
is the personality? If you're a three-person firm, then the personality of those individuals in the firm are going to determine your culture. And
And your
LPs
brand.
that. And if you present yourself, if you're a three-person firm and you try and present yourselves as a 10,000 employee investment bank, it's so obvious that it's inauthentic, and that is a real problem when it comes to trust. You destroy that trust before you've even had the chance to demonstrate why somebody should think about trusting you. I'm just want to just one final thing, because it made me think of something funny that happened a few months ago.
Mhm.
I work with a very talented designer called Keith Barber, and we were putting together some examples of work that we'd done for a bunch of fund managers, and we wanted to show the variety of design styles on fund manager identities that we put together. And we he put together an overview of some of the logos that he'd done, and every single one of them was blue. Now the first option, second, third, fourth option that we'd shown all of these managers were not blue, but every single one of these groups. I mean, thankfully there were some others that we were able to get in, just show some variety. But they're just like, we want to be dark blue. We want that gravitas. We want people to feel like we belong. And
Yeah.
it's all very well trying to belong, and that is the temptation if you feel like you're new and maybe don't quite fit into the quality and experience and track record from someone else's perspective. This is kind of like, lack of self-confidence, really. So your inclination is to try and fit in as much as possible, and that encourages you again to copy what other people are doing so that you feel like you fit in, you're not standing out. But obviously, the real objective is to stand out, is
And out. Exactly.
standing out. So, yeah, you have to be credible and you have to seem relevant. So it has to be thought through, but you do not have to have a dark blue logo. You do not have to be named after the street in Mayfair where where your first office was. You don't have to do those. You don't have to name yourself after a color and a mineral or a geographic feature. It's not necessary, but it's very difficult to convince people to take that, what they see as a risk, right?
Or wear blue suit or something
Look,
at every conference.
I'm wearing a navy jacket right today, so I'm not taking my own advice. But
Me
I have
too, actually.
got a yellow wristband on, so there's some hope for me yet, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's why, for example, I remember like when we were doing like rebranding in the beginning when I joined Mara, we did
Uh,
like you always had this orange color, and orange is the color of trust.
oh, is that right? Okay, I didn't know.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes, 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 that's the color of trust. But yeah, since we were speaking now about branding, and what do you think private markets firms misunderstand most about what good branding actually means?
Well, to sort of take it back slightly, and I don't know that private markets firms are any different from other firms. I mean, I've worked in
Hmm.
a couple of other industries, and there's the same issue there, really. But the biggest misconception is that your brand is your visual identity.
Hmm.
That's a component of it for sure, but your brand is everything you stand for. I think it's, is it Jeff Bezos said this or so, but it's what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's your brand, it's your reputation, and it's a sum of every single interaction that somebody has with your brand. And that could be direct, in other words, like when someone meets you, Alexandra, you're representing Mara, so you are a component of the brand, right? So how they take to you, what you say to them, how you respond to the way they're talking to you. That's all part of how they feel about Mara, but it's also indirect. So if
Yeah.
somebody else asks somebody they meet at a conference, I'm thinking about using Mara. What do you think about Mara? That's just as relevant, if arguably more relevant in a sense. Even though it's indirect, it's a proxy for the actual experience because that might be somebody who they trust more. They have they've got no skin in the game there. And they can be quite honest and open. Whereas obviously, if you speak to somebody from the organization, there's the potential that they obviously have an incentive they
Yeah.
want to create a good impression. Whereas somebody completely neutral doesn't necessarily have that. And so I think if you think about your brand purely as the visual aspects of it, you're
Mhm.
missing out a huge amount. And that,
Exactly.
it comes back to what do you really stand for? What are the key pillars of your messaging? What makes Mara in this sense, or from what makes my clients my client, what makes Wagtails. If you haven't really thought about that before you start thinking about um, you know, what you're going to call your firm, I think that's a bit of a problem. I think you're doing it backwards.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I completely agree. A lot of managers initially think of branding as something quite surface level, like a lo nice logo, polished deck, even, brand colors. Okay, how we can fit in, how we can still be the different a bit, how I can call my company or things like that. So, funny
How
enough,
do you
sorry?
how do you deal with that? Because you must have managers. So managers come to you, right? Because they're looking to raise capital in a different way. You want them to be successful, and they
Yeah.
want to be successful. And so, you're very aligned. The advice that you give them, they should listen to it because you know what you're talking about. But how do you convince them to think about that in a kind of a deeper way? Because they must come to you with expectations about the fact that this is we just need to have a nice logo and things like that. How do you kind of explain to them?
Yeah, but in practice, it's much deeper. It's like how clearly you communicate your strategy, how consistent you are across all touch points,
That's a good point. Yeah.
and ultimately how people experience you as a firm. So as you said, it's like the whole team, like who you are as a team. If your team are the people of trustworthiness, if they have their big personal brand, then it's of course maybe easier to establish that trust as well.
Yeah, that's another aspect. I think, if you're somebody who's been very successful in one field that's related to what you're trying to do in the fund management space, you have to think carefully about how you can leverage that, and you have to be prepared for a situation where that's not as important to people as it might have been where you were before, and that can be a bit of recalibration that's required. It can be a bit of a shock.
Yes, exactly. Because it's not only like about how do we look, it's
Yeah,
like how do we want to be understood.
yeah, yeah,
Like that's much more valuable place to be than just like polished how do we look. When you look at our socials, when you look at our website, when you look at us at the events, like, but how do we want to be understood? As a
yeah.
trustworthy deal execution partner, like as somebody who is there for you, as you as a client become part of our Mara Club and many other things that are going on. So I think that's something that's the way how maybe you will also position yourself in the market. And
Mm,
so you'll also now when mentioning positioning, how do you
yeah.
think about positioning in private markets, like particularly for managers who don't yet have long track record?
Yeah, so there's you'll quite often hear people say that track record isn't everything, track record is table stakes. And
Mm.
yeah, I agree to an extent with that. There's a lot more to it, but it is also like table stakes. And if you don't have a track record, it's very difficult well, it's easy to understand why someone might not give you as much time as they will with somebody who's proven
Mhm. Yeah.
their strategy in whatever environment that was. But one way to do better there is to really nail down with some proper clarity what the story is. What are you trying to tell people about yourselves? And one way of doing that I think is quite effective is to think about three things. And the first one is and these things are what you would want somebody to take away from the conversation, whether that's an LP, if it's maybe, a potential acquisition target, or even, if you're a small firm, growing firm, it can be employees, potential employees, right? You're trying to build the team. That's an important part of your brand and your positioning as well. But I think the first thing I would think about is what's the most important thing to know about my past, about our firm's past and our heritage. So, what is most important to know about how we've got to this point, why we started the firm, the challenges we've already surmounted, the obstacles that were in our way, and the personal stories that are connected up with that. That's a good starting point for people to try and understand that this is a journey that you're on. Then I think you want to think about crystallizing what's most interesting about what you're doing today. So, what is a bit different? What is, di easily distinguishable from what other people are doing, and having a real impact, having a positive impact on the outcomes for all of your stakeholders. And then thirdly, what's most exciting about the future, and this is almost the most important one, is how can you paint a picture, a credible vision of what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Why should somebody invest in a relationship with you? What can they expect to get out of it? And if you can frame that in such a way that it feels like it's connected to where you've come from and what you're doing now, you've got a much better chance of landing that. I mean, and I find that even with really well-established groups, people that have been going for 20, 25 years, sometimes haven't taken the time to think about that. What's most important to know about our past? What's most interesting about what we're doing today? And what's most exciting about the future? And when they start to reframe things in those terms, it becomes a bit easier to see what somebody might see in them. And that builds confidence and conviction, and it allows for greater consistency once that's codified, once that's written down. But do you see the same thing? I mean, you probably work with more, let's say, emerging managers or newer managers than I do. Do you find it's the same problem for them around positioning?
I think yes, because I mean, but it's understandable, when you don't have like a proven track record, you spray and pray, right? You're trying to tell everything to everybody through all the channels so that you can, like create that credibility, right? But that
Credibility,
often leads,
inspiration.
yeah, I mean, but but I think it often leads to like broad and generic positioning. You need to be very like strategic when it comes to your target audience, target campaigns, what channels you're going to use, and different things. That's why I think the managers who do this well are the ones who are very clear on why they exist and
Yeah,
what they uniquely see in the market, and also where they don't play. That's also important to know where they don't play, where they won't be. That level of focus is actually what builds conviction with investors.
yeah, yeah. I think that's that is a good point. It's a challenge for people, but it's so central. I don't think I think all marketing is bad marketing if you haven't figured out that story, that narrative, which can, as you say, can be as much about what you don't do as to what you do. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, and when we speak now about those messages and all these taglines, slogans, and everything, what does effective messaging actually look like in private markets?
Well, it's the same as frankly, it's the same as it looks in any market, really. It has to
Mm,
communicate something. A message is something that is communicated. Now, the message is what's received, not what's sent, right? So it
yeah.
doesn't matter if you think it's a very clever way of describing yourself. If that's not the way it's received by your audience, then it's completely wasted. It's a waste of time. It's ineffective. And taglines and slogans, all sorts of things like that. If they capture the essence of a firm, that can be useful. That can be helpful. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. The problem is they often don't. Right, they just a few words stuck together because they sort of sound good, or they're a bit clever. Being too clever is often a real challenge, or
Mm,
it's a real problem. People get a bit too focused on their own cleverness to come up with a really witty line, and then they realize, oh, actually, it's not communicating actually as directly and as appropriately as something that's perhaps not so clever, but actually does explain who we are in a very easy to understand way. Now, I've got a lot of time for wordplay and all sorts of uses of rhetoric and
yeah.
language styling to help things become more memorable. It's definitely worth doing, but you should only do that once you've figured out what the message is, right? So you figure out what the message is, and then think, is there a more easy to understand, repeatable, memorable way of saying that? Not what's the most memorable thing I can think of saying, and then not worrying so much about whether it's true or whether it feels true or authentic
Yes, exactly.
about the firm. And there is a risk that people lean into the superficial elements too much. Again, like the visual identity, a tagline. If it works, then it's great. To communicate that is perfect, and it doesn't have to communicate a technical thing about your business. I worked at a business, and really the big differentiation between what we were doing and what other people were doing was that we just trying to help our clients take a risk, like be bold. And so that was kind of the tagline for the firm. It didn't say anything about actually what we do, but it conveyed something that was really important about the way that we wanted our clients to feel empowered. And that can be just as legitimate, I think, as something that explains the structure that you're using in Jersey. Not that you would use that as a tagline, but
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
you get the idea. So how do you think about Mara's positioning? Do you have a tagline?
Yeah, we do have simplifying access to private markets.
Okay, yeah.
It's pretty simple one, right?
Now
Uh,
I do know that you used to have one that wasn't that, right?
no, I changed that.
That's good because I think it was making private markets public, right?
Yeah, I think it was that one in before I joined. Once I joined, I think I just rebranded things.
Well, I think that's a good example because that is quite clever because you've got the opposition of public and private and it sounds nice together. You've got this kind of alliteration going on there, but it actually doesn't describe what the firm does. And the one you've got now really does do that, right? That's the
Thank you. Thank you for saying
I
that.
I think it's true. It's a much better way of describing in a very short way what it is that Mara does. So yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, yeah. But, well, for us at Mar, I think it was very like we were very intentional when it comes to positioning. So
Yeah,
because we operate in a space where there are many service providers, right? And it would be very easy to sound similar.
yeah,
But what we have focused on instead is being very clear that we are not just providing like infrastructure, we are enabling investors to assess and execute opportunities in a more streamlined and flexible way. And what we'd like to say as a team that we are yes sayers. So we say yes a lot compared to other service providers. So we try to find a way to suit to our clients. Even in complex deals and complex situations, we are trying to find a way. And we usually do that, like finding a way to basically execute their deals
yeah.
in a timely manner as well. And also, like, we are always making sure that we are consistent. So consistency is definitely something that also differentiate us in the market because whether that's how we speak, whether it's how we design our materials, or how we show up in conversations like this. So basically, consistency is the key with clients, with everything we do. So I think that's how we position Mara at the moment. And but I wanted actually to ask you, how closely linked do you think branding and fundraising really are in private markets?
I mean, like as closely linked as any aspect of marketing and sales is, the difference between those two functions. I mean, technically, there are 1,000 different ways you could describe that, but in reality, they're both part of the same thing. It's all about connecting your product with an audience and providing them with the means to trigger a sale, right? So I
Hmm.
think it's possible for somebody who's very talented to go out and raise capital using the strength of their personality and their skill as long as there's an at least mediocre product, right?
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah.
Something awful, but as long as you've got something that's halfway okay, if you've got really talented investor relations people, which sometimes can be, the managing partner of the firm, or you've managed to secure a really good placement agent, which is challenging, really challenging if you're a small, newer fund. But you've got a chance then, even with a relatively mediocre product, as long as it's packaged well, as long as you make it as easy to sell as possible. A talented salesperson, distribution team, manage to sell that product. But it's so much easier if you've got a great product, if you've got a great understanding of how to connect what you provide to what people need. In fact, actually, there's one aspect that people just forget about all the time. And, if you're a fund manager and you are pitching your fund to an LP, I would say this is a marketing idea, really, but it's directly relates to success in fundraising, I believe. You have to try and see things from your audience's perspective. And if you are selling to LPs as a GP, you need to understand the pressures and the goals and the objectives that LPs have, not just what you're trying to achieve, not just you're trying to sell your fund.
Exactly. Yeah.
What does it do for them? And people forget the importance of the role that your strategy can play in someone's portfolio, right? So
Yeah.
working with a really interesting manager, I won't mention them to save their blushes, but super interesting manager that has a really interesting um, investment target that allows them to deliver a really smoothed and blended DPI over time. So they are going to be investing in some firms that they're exiting quite quickly, and others
Hmm.
that they'll be holding longer. So the
Yeah.
return on the capital back to the LP is typically going to be much quicker, or at least a portion of it will be much quicker than you might otherwise find in other ostensibly similar strategies or competing strategies, if you like. And one of the things that we spoke to the team about there, and they were already aware of this, but they hadn't really codified it into the presentation. It wasn't really it
Hmm.
it deserved much more attention because
Yeah.
that's something from an LP. If I know as an LP that if I invest in this fund, DPI is going to be triggered much sooner, at least a portion of it, that frees up my whole allocation program to be able to invest with other managers and perhaps other strategies from this manager. It's a multi-strategy provider. But you have to realize how important that is. If you just say we are doing the same thing as these other guys, but we think we're better at it, that's not a super credible statement. But we have structured our investment sourcing in such a way that pretty much we're pretty much certain that we'll be delivering distributions back to you earlier than our competitors. Well, like particularly in this environment, that's gold dust. But you only realize that if you can really think about things from the audience's perspective. And a lot of people just play at that.
Yeah.
Say to themselves, "Yeah, we're thinking about what our audiences want, but are they? But they sometimes they aren't really." And it's why speaking to your audience or getting somebody to, like Wagtails, for example, but there are other groups that do this. Hire somebody to go out and speak to your LPs, speak to your portfolio companies, and tell you what your audiences value about you and where, frankly, they think you should be doing better.
Yeah, exactly. I agree completely with you. And I think fundraising is ultimately built on trust. And a big part of the trust is formed even before the first conversation happens. So I think it's like just like how you show up, how clearly you communicate, how consistent your message is, all of that contributes to your reputation, all of it. So it's not just about the performance, it's about whether people feel confident backing you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I often say to managers, especially if it's the first time we're working together, that a lot of fundraising is about promises, right?
Yeah.
Promises.
Yeah.
And if you want to raise capital from an institutional LP and it's your first fund, then like I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult. What you should be doing is not ignoring those relationships where you think you can't raise money from them in this cycle. You should be going to them proactively and saying, we don't expect that you'll be able to come into our first fund, but this is what we are planning to build, and this is what we are going to do. And then
Yeah.
I hope we can have a productive, I'll keep you in the loop. We'll let you know, please sign up. We'll keep you in the loop with all the communications about the deals we're doing and the fund closings and so on and so forth, and operationally and in the team what's happening. Let's stay in touch. And then you can see by the time we come back to the market with our next fund, that we are people that do what they say they're going to do and, deliver on our promises.
Nice.
That then puts you in a completely different category of manager to somebody that just comes up and knocks on the door and says, "Hi, LP, I'd like you to invest in this fund." Right? It's a completely different proposition.
Exactly, exactly. I agree on that. And since we are talking about fundraising and it's all about money, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you actually, for managers that don't have budget to hire any huge, like, I don't know, marketing agency or anything like that, where are the critical areas to focus, spend, and time?
Well, I'm interested in your thoughts on this because I know you're a very active operational marketer. So I'll leave that kind of side of things for you if that's okay, Alexandra. But I think just if there was one thing I want people to think about really carefully is before you do anything, get clarity on the story. Like, really take the time. Ideally, you bring in a third party to help you, and yeah, that does cost money, but that multiplies across every single thing that you do after that. Everything you do after that will be better because you spent a little bit of money and took some time, dedicated some time and resources to figuring out what exactly it is that you want to be saying all the time. What, not just what you want to be saying, but what you want people to take away from every interaction they have with you, direct, indirect, when you're present, when you're not. That is for me the really critical thing. Um, but Alex, I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say about this on a more kind of operational execution level. Where do you think managers should spend more of their budget, assuming they've already done that, to kind of get that story really clear?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's always about clarity and consistency over scale. Like be clear, like as you said, clear messaging is really important to know your story. There is no better teller of your story than yourself, I would say, because you always have that possibility to sell your idea, I think, better than anybody else because you know like exactly what is the product and how it came or service or anything like that. But definitely it will be good to like interact with somebody else and to uncover the other hidden details
Yeah,
to create better message.
yeah.
Because not everybody is a good marketer, not everybody is a good storyteller, but somebody is great in producing something, in building something new, but they just don't know how to tell you why this is good enough, right? So when it comes to Mara, I guess we spend a lot of time making sure we are very clear in how we explain what we do, whether that's in conversation, content, events. And then we focus on high impact channels.
Okay, all right. So what does that mean for people not familiar?
So basically, high impact channels are the ones that are like, let's say we love in-person conversations. We love to meet people. We love events. We love to basically have that content that have more meaningful interactions.
So that's more on a kind of a one-to-one basis. That's where you're
Exactly.
curating conversation. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. We like to do that, and we would rather do that than do everything. And I think that's been much more effective than spreading ourselves too thin. So I guess it's always nice when you really meet somebody, when you meet Sasha, when you meet me, when you meet anybody from our team and talk to us, when you have any deal that is stuck or when you want to do something, you need SPV or you need your feeder fund solution or you want to co-invest into a fund. So basically you just go and you just tell us the story, what's going on, what's happening. And then I think that meaningful like conversation and interaction is much better than just like, as I said, spreading ourselves too thin anywhere else. But yeah, that's something that I would say from operational standpoint would be always like maybe a good thing from my perspective, like let's say from our. But I also want to ask you, since I think that a lot of firms struggle with clarity in how they explain what they do, especially in private markets, I think. What is clarity? Why, like, is clarity so hard to achieve in this industry?
Yeah, I don't think it's I don't think it's really actually that much harder in this industry than any other. But let's if I think about relating the challenges to this industry, then I would say it's often because people are either too focused on the technical details of what they
Mm-hmm.
rather than the impact that they have, Or again, they're taking what they see as a shortcut, but it's a shortcut off a cliff, right? Which is to copy what someone else is doing. So, they aren't really engaging with what their messages are. They're looking at what someone else's is and trying to kind of copy and paste them over themselves. It's like someone wearing a mask of The Rock or something and pretending that they're Dwayne Johnson. I mean, it's just no, it's silly.
Exactly.
Nobody liked Dwayne Johnson. But I think those are the sorts of things that are challenges and the technical details. I mean, I work quite a lot in well, it wasn't even called SaaS then. It was a long time. I'm dating myself now, but they're like in the enterprise software space. Let's say if I was working with founders in that space, they'd always want to talk about the tech stack and how they develop the product and all of this stuff. And like, frankly, people don't care. They want to understand what it does for them. What are the benefits? It's
Exactly.
also, features, focusing on features rather than benefits. And that is as much a challenge, I would say, in private markets as anywhere else. So yeah, I think those are the sorts of things that are most important, whether it's private markets or not. But do you think that like the managers that you work with, they even recognize that that's a problem that they don't? Do you think they recognize that they aren't being that clear about how they explain who they are and what they do?
I think I think not always. I think they are not always clear. I think because when you're doing what you're doing, when you're close to your strategy, everything feels obvious. Like I don't need to explain maybe in details, or I don't know how to like. Probably he knows.
Yeah.
But from the outside, it can be quite difficult to follow, especially for someone seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I was also like getting a lot of questions about different technical things regarding Mara, and people want to understand clearly what it is about that you are doing. So that gap isn't always immediately, I would say, visible internally, which is why it can persist. Usually, it only becomes clear when messaging doesn't land the way they expect.
Yeah.
And on the note regarding copying, pasting, and everything, I think when it comes to messaging and everything, I think this market is highly regulated and traditional. From those navy blue, dark blue suits in the conferences, I think the managers feel that they will be judged. They fear that they will be judged if they post some comment on LinkedIn, if they like some post of somebody, if they post some specific photo, and or the way they are dressed. Like they would rather dress dark blue or navy than dress pink suit or something like that. So I think it's mirroring each other is like, I guess, safe side of the things. I
Yeah.
think not everybody has that like courage to like just like distinguish themselves in the market because their fear because it's very traditional and very like highly regulated industry. They think like market in essence, they think they will be judged. That's why they're trying like just like to be
Yeah.
to fit the environment.
I think, the problem with that approach is that the LPs that are going to invest in your first or second fund are not going to be the LPs that think you're kind of okay. They are not going to invest in your fund. And you are much better off spending your time with the ones that really actually like who you are and what you're about. And the way to do that is to project that like aggressively. So, do not worry about the fact if 70, 80% of LPs are able to say no to you very quickly, that is a gift. That is a gift. The thing that will kill you as a first, second, third, how seventh or eighth fund manager raising a fund is the amount of time it takes you to get people to say no, not the amount of time it takes you to get people to say yes. And if there's one thing that I would want people to take away from this web. Well, I hope they'll take away more than one thing, but if
Yeah.
only one thing, then I think it would be that get yourself into a position where people can say no quickly. That will save you. That will save your fund. That will turn your fundraising cycle that will take your fundraising cycle to, touch wood, 18 months and not 3.5 years. Because if you're a small team and you're forever chasing people that are sort of lukewarm about what you're doing, you're wasting your time. You're wasting their time as well. But
Yeah.
more importantly, actually, from a selfish perspective, you're wasting your own time, and that's a huge opportunity cost to maintaining, um, maintaining a dialogue, forcing, not maintaining, but forcing a dialogue with somebody that does not want a relationship. That is not a good way to spend your time, and it will kill your firm. So yeah,
Yeah, that's a good advice. I think audience will really appreciate this advice. And when I talked about suits, how you portray, how you to interact, how important you think is confidence in how firm presents itself, and how do you notice about firms that have this kind of conviction?
you can feel it, right?
You can feel it, okay?
That's what it gives you. If somebody is confident, if they have confidence in their fund, in their strategy, in their team, you can feel it. And if you can't feel that, that's a real red flag. And even though it might feel like something really intangible, it has a visceral emotional impact on the person in the room. And I've worked with managers. I think of one example very clearly in my mind where
Hmm.
an LP basically told me that they didn't invest with a fund manager because the team just didn't feel enthusiastic enough, confident enough about the quality of the strategy. The LP said in very colorful language that I won't repeat here that if they were managing that strategy in the current environment, they would be so excited about it that they wouldn't be able to shut up about it. And this guy was kind of just like laying out the facts, and it just did not work in a way that it should have. And that has to do with confidence, conviction, and that comes from clarity,
Exactly.
consistency, feeling like you're all working together in the same goal, and doing this kind of work about the messaging and where you're going. That's not just about telling an interesting story externally, right? It builds
Yeah.
conviction internally. If you do an exercise where you really get to grips and understand what makes you different and where you're going as a business, that allows you to put like a flag on the mountain and say, this is where we're going. And as soon as everybody knows where they're going, it's much easier to get behind it. If you
Yeah.
don't do that, you're going to struggle and it will be just immediately apparent. People won't quite be able to put their finger on it sometimes, but they will just leave the conversation a little uneasy. And certainly it's much more difficult to convince someone to make a decision if that's
Yeah.
happening, I think. Do you so we've spoken actually quite a lot about differences between different kinds of markets, and I've said a couple of times now that I don't think private markets is that different from anything else, but let's just have a look at that for a second. Do you think there is actually much difference between how an LP selects a fund to how like they might decide which vegetables they're going to pick up from the supermarket, or I don't know what kind of strappy top they're going to buy to wear to the private equity gala later that month?
Yeah, Whole Foods or Waitrose, yeah. So I mean, yeah, I think they do. I think it's very different, particularly in private markets, I think. When you're making like investment decision, you're not just evaluating the product, you're evaluating people, judgment, long-term alignment, values. So I think they are parallels with other high-value decisions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But there is a much stronger emphasis on trust and conviction in private markets. And I think that's where how a manager communicates, presents themselves become really important. Because most of our clients are coming from referrals, and that's the testimonial of our good work so far.
Yeah. And actually there's a question in the chat I've seen from JP. How
Mhm.
how is it pronouncing that? Harop? Sorry, just kidding, JP. Anyway, there's what he said. He's asked for views on the importance of testimonials. He says he used to tell people, if I tell you how good I am, no one will believe it. But if someone else tells you how good I am, you might believe it. I think that's very true. And actually that's one of the ways that I would define the difference between sales and marketing, right? So if I tell you that you should hire Wagtails to work with you on your positioning and your messaging, that's sales. But if I can figure out a way to put enough evidence into the world that someone else tells you that, then that's marketing and that's more believable. That becomes a more authentic and trustworthy source of that information. So I think, testimonials are so important. They give so much credibility to what
I
you're
agree.
and so yeah, I think it's a great question, JP. And
Yeah, thank you, JP, for the question. Yeah, I would like also to, since we were speaking about confidence, there is like a fine line between confidence and arrogance.
okay, yeah, yeah, okay.
So, is the difference just perspective or is it real? If it is real, how would you define it?
Okay, I like that question. That's a really good question. So, I think there's a certain element of this that is subjective, right? Because it's how someone is coming across to you. But if we were to sort of ignore that and saying all other things being equal, if you were to have the same person in the same environment assessing two people, how would you tell which one was confident, or how might you tell which one was confident and which one was arrogant? Then I would say a simple way to think about it is to say that confidence is based on knowledge and arrogance is based on assumption, right? And
Hmm.
presumption. So an arrogant person will assume because of the way they feel about themselves or because what other people have told them, let's be honest, it's not always somebody's fault.
Yeah, yeah,
They're in an environment where they're only hearing good things about what they do and they only think good things about themselves. They might assume that they only ever have good ideas. And so they might, reasonably deliver those ideas with real conviction and confidence, but it's based on assumption. It's not based on fact. So it's arrogant, I think. Whereas if what you're doing is thinking carefully and taking all different perspectives in order to reach a conclusion, of course, there are unavoidable biases in every way that humans think, but let's, be generous in this definition. Then I think if you're basing what you're doing on knowledge and only knowledge, not, your assumed um, application of that knowledge or how that bleeds into other areas, but if you're just talking about what you know to be true, then you can say that with confidence. And I think it does play differently. I think it does give differently if you to use the vernacular of my teenage kids. But
yeah.
yeah, that's how I would define it. I think arrogance is based on assumption and confidence is based on knowledge. Um,
Yeah,
I don't
that's a good
we
definition. I think I would agree with you, basically. That's a good definition. So yeah, definitely I would say like when it comes to, let's say, managers, and when it comes to like there are some you can easily tell, like basically confidence comes from clarity and transparency. So whereas arrogance come from like basically coming across as this dismissiveness. And so another is how they talk about risk. Strong manager acknowledge it and explain how they manage it rather than glossing over it. So basically, broadly, if you're focused on building a relationship, not necessarily selling a solution or a product, your difference is usually quite noticeable. Basically, and just like in conversation or the way, like basically you interact.
Yeah, I think that's another really important aspect of it. It's not just about what it's based on, but it's about how you respond, like how
Exactly.
respect. I think what you're saying there, if I'm understanding correctly, that you can read it in terms of how respectful that person is in the way that they interact with you. Do they think they are more important than you? Is usually a pretty good yardstick, actually, I think, for if someone is arrogant or
Exactly.
yeah.
And I think also I want to also say this. I think it's all about open and effective communication. And effective communication is also active listening, so that you really understand what the people is saying. You need to ask in return, is this what you meant? Is this what you think? Because usually I think people don't listen to respond, not necessarily to understand. And I think that can create also a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to every type of conversation, or if somebody portrays to be arrogant or confident. So just giving people space and time to explain and trying to understand them in order to, respond and understand in the right manner, not only like based on the assumption, as you said, like not really based on the facts.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely what differentiate like arrogant or confident managers in that
Yeah.
essence and how they actually work in the industry and what they do. So open communication, effective communication, and active listening is something that is really, really, really important.
So I think, to do exactly that, right? I think one of the things that you're saying I find really interesting in what you've just said there is the
Mhm.
idea of receptiveness, right?
Yes, exactly.
You see this sometimes with arrogant people, arrogant managers, let's say, they aren't really listening to what the other person is saying. They're waiting to say the next thing they are going to say. Now, this is actually another tip. If you're going to go into a pitch and you're going to have a conversation, yeah, you want to keep things natural, so you don't want to over rehearse, but it's hard to over rehearse. It's really hard to over rehearse. And if you rehearse something well enough that you know exactly what you're going to say, that gives you more confidence and you'll be more relaxed and then you're more able to focus on what the other person's saying. Because if you are stressed about remembering everything you have to say about the 100-day plan or your value creation triggers within the portfolio, then how could you expect actually to be able to listen intelligently, actively to the person you're having a conversation with? I don't think you can. So, like practice it doesn't have to be perfect. So I won't say practice makes perfect, but practice makes it easier and it allows you to be more present. Being present is the respectful way to be, and being respectful is the way to communicate confidence in what you're doing rather than arrogance and disregard for what else is going on. You don't want to have main character syndrome in an LP meeting. That's not a good look.
Yeah, exactly. I agree completely. Every person, every moment is gift to you. So that's why being in the present and being fully present is really, really important just to feel it and to know how to use that moment effectively.
Yeah.
And I think I'm conscious of time. We have just one more question to finish.
Okay.
Of course, if any of the participants have questions, just pop in Q&A. But I would just like to ask you for the end, like looking ahead, how do you think expectations around branding, positioning, and communication in private markets are changing?
So I think the biggest change, but it is slow, and the most important change is within fund managers themselves, right? Everybody that they are selling to already has it intrinsically responds to these groups on the basis of how they're communicating the trust they've built. In other words, what we consider brand, not just the visual identity. The biggest room for improvement is managers themselves taking it seriously and understanding that every single interaction is a component of their brand, and the reverse is also true. So having developed that strong brand, that reputation, that allows you then to get through some difficult conversations with a bit more grace and ease, and some more sympathy and support. Encourages people, your stakeholders, to be supportive in difficult times rather than seeing it as an excuse to kind of dump you and pick up a different manager instead of re-upping. So it can be existential, frankly. So you've got to take it seriously. That's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I think we are starting to see it that they are starting to adapt and shift, but it's relatively early. Expectations are definitely rising, especially as more capital flows into private markets and the audience becomes broader, right? Some managers, I think, are becoming much more intentional about how they position and communicate, but there is still a gap, and which is also an opportunity.
Yeah, I think also, sorry I didn't mean to interrupt there. Sorry. But I think it's important to make a distinction between adoption and adaption, right? So adopting, like having like it sounds crazy now, but like 15 years ago, hardly any private equity fund managers even had LinkedIn pages for their company. Their
Yeah.
profiles were actually written by Wikipedia. It was kind of dragged in. That's awful. So like having an Instagram page is not improving your branding. It's how you adapt the way you talk to the world to to incorporate a sensitivity to what good branding is. That is how you improve your brand, not by starting to communicate what you do on Facebook. That is a kind of executional, operational consequence of thinking about what you do properly, but it's not the starting point. You shouldn't be checking boxes here. You should be thinking carefully and deeply about how you talk about who you are.
Exactly, exactly. That's why I think since there is still a gap, there is opportunity for those who
Yeah,
are get it right early to stand out really. So basically, as we said in the beginning, like clarity, confidence, and consistency, like and credibility, something that really differentiates you. Try to put it in nice narrative and try to see what channels you need to use in order to get that attention that you need or that the leads you need, the target group you want to basically vote for you or be your client. So I think just like as you said, like the point is to sit down, be clear about your messaging, have confidence in what you're saying, and then you will have credibility.
yeah, exactly that.
So I will end with that. I think we don't have any other questions, but maybe we can couple of more seconds if somebody want to ask anything. Thank you once again, JP, for the question. I hope the answer was good. Um, I think we don't have any questions. Okay. Thank you, Matt, for joining. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope also our participants also enjoyed it. And yeah, see you again for another topic.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. All
Yeah,
right.
thank you very much. Bye.